Hey guys, Waiki here. This is my first devlog for my game Curse of the Green Sea. The game is inspired by a few of my favorite games, most notably Sunless Sea and old school RuneScape. The gameplay loop at its core is essentially that of Sunless Sea. You start on a home island with a boat and adventure out to other islands to complete quests and bring back reports of how those islands are doing. The main faction on your home island rewards you for those with currency, which you can then use to buy a better ship, more supplies, better weaponry, and armor, etc. Think of Sea of Thieves, but instead of getting cosmetic only rewards, you get real upgrades. So you've seen a bit of footage from my game and might be thinking to yourself, wow, he's already got a lot. Well, long story short, I spent about 2 years writing a custom 3D engine, bunny ears, on top of Monogame, but my code was eventually such a mess to sort out that I decided to start over from scratch. Yeah. So we'll be starting new, but I might reference clips from my old game in the future. Alright, so this is my current game. It is not a game at all. It is just the beginnings of an engine. So what I'm essentially doing here is copying NES to some extent, which is a framework which I believe is based on the big bad U word, Unity. I don't particularly like that, but I have to say it is a good system. Everything is composed of entities and components. All right, I've created a fun little illustration describing the difference between more traditional programming and a entity component style of game programming. So if you're familiar with OOP, if you're a programmer, you'll know that you can create classes and base classes. In this scenario, we've created a rabbit. We've explicitly given it a weapon, a vehicle, some sound, and some physics. And it creates this coherent image of a rabbit on a skateboard, but it's very rigid. So you're kind of saying that, hey, every rabbit should have a weapon, should have a vehicle, and if it doesn't have those things, then you're nulling these out, and you're creating edge cases for what happens if it doesn't have those things. Whereas if you're kind of going with this more loosely coupled entity component approach, instead of describing explicitly a rabbit, you're just creating this one universal object called an entity, and all this has essentially is a empty list of components, where these are components, things that can tie onto it, so to speak. And you're kind of creating a Frankenstein's creature. Now you could have just a actor with ears, or you could have an actor with ears and a skateboard, or you could have all of them together, or none of them together. And it creates this sort of flexible programming pattern where you can tie systems together and not be locked into having this rabbit on a skateboard. Very cool. Let me show you what I mean. So if I click create new here, I now have a blank slate, which I can essentially tie different things onto. For example, let's go ahead and move this new entity out. So this here represents this entity. This one, if I click on this, represents this. So this is my entity here. I can go ahead and add a model to it. So let's create a component. It has a red debug sphere for no model. Let's go ahead and make it into, I don't know, for example, a boulder. So now we have this boulder. I also have controls that I've copied essentially from Blender. I really like the way Blender handles rotations and movement. You can just drag along axes. It's really nice. Let's go ahead and add a physics component. So we'll create that, we can edit that. We'll choose from just a default one here. We could do any of these things here. For example, we could do a dynamic sphere, which will cause it to have gravity and drop. We don't want that. Then we can go ahead and add a sprite component, which will add a sprite from a sprite sheet in 3D space. Let's go ahead and make it into, for example, a UI present. If I edit the transform here, I can adjust that, I can position it up a little bit. So that's there in 3D space. You'll notice it does not spin to the camera. So if you want that behavior, for example, you can go ahead and edit this. You can have it face the camera. I've just put some arbitrary limits on how many you can add. I could always add more. I feel like things should only ever have one physics component and maybe more than one model. I have to decide about that. Another cool thing I have is lighting. So I can enable lighting here. You can see there's no lights in the scene, so everything is dark, but add a light component here. And then I can go ahead and scale up the radius and move it until the sprite here is marking where the light is. I can duplicate components here, so I can duplicate this guy, rotate this guy. And then I have some other things, like I have a logger for looking at what's been going on while I've been moving stuff. I have a saving and loading system. That's essentially where I'm at right now. This all has taken me, honestly, like 3 months. It's not easy. It's taken me a while. But I'm hoping that at the end of the day, restarting was worth it and that things will move a lot faster. So next up, there's quite a few things I have to do. One of the problems I have is that if I click on one of these entities here, notice I'm actually able to click on it, but that's only because they have a physics component. If I delete the physics component and I click back here, I can no longer select this entity. Right? The only way I can select it is by going up here into the Entity Manager tab, which is not what I want, right? I want to be able to select things just by clicking on them, even if they don't have a physics component. So I'm going to have to figure out how to do that. I'm thinking that we just add a temporary invisible physics component, which only works in an editor mode whenever entity is created. So lots to think about. I'm going to check back in once I have a more solid plan. I thought I'd show what I'm trying to do here with painting this like forge I have. Essentially, it's going to be a place where the player can come and smelt ores. I'm going to have a little like lava flow that comes out here, and then they'll walk up to this and they'll like press E to interact or use the controller to press A on it, put their ores in there. It'll take some time and then it'll spit them out. I don't have a whole lot of experience with Blender in general, especially not painting things. So I initially wasn't going to paint anything by hand. This is all UV unwrapped, where every single quad is a certain color, right? So you can see like this quad here is its own shade. This panel here is this color up here. So I'm just changing UV coordinates. It all samples from this image. So it's really, really small in texture space, but the only issue is that when you're in the engine, lighting calculations have more faces to bounce off of. There's more geometry, and at the end of the day, it's not a huge difference, but you can tell just like how many like cuts there are in here, for example, when I could just honestly paint this instead of like making the geometry all cut up like this. So for example, here's a wide boulder. I've kind of like put some paint over the top, some cracks. Doesn't look super great yet. This feels very organic when it should feel just like very stone texture. For now, I'm pretty happy. This is the first time I've ever like actually painted something in Blender, so I hope it's pretty clear here that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I'm just kind of using some like real life reference images. From pixel art, I have some experience in. I try to just go like darker is usually at the bottom. You get lighter as you go up, and I'm kind of just willy-nilly blurring things in, trying to create some semblance of panels. But yeah, I don't really know what I'm doing, but it is fun, so it's all good. All right, well, that was a solid 4 to 5 hour refactor. Essentially what I did is I made this eye movable interface here and added these methods here, where if I create the entity, it'll automatically generate the editor collider. If I delete it, it'll delete it. If I change modes, it'll also generate and delete. So for example, if I go into here, I'm in the entity edit mode. Here I can go to nav edit. If I go back, this generates, I can click on it and move it around. If I create a new one here, okay, I fixed that. Yeah, so if I add an entity here, now it'll automatically generate with the collectible. Boom. Next, I want to do it for individual components. Luckily, it should not be too hard to extend from here. All right, so it's the next day. As you can see, it is now working. Let's give an example. So if I go ahead and add another sprite component, and now click on that and move it and rotate it independently. And then if I move the parent entity or even rotate it, you can see these all now function properly. Okay, I've made a few more improvements. One of them is if I click on a component, it'll now draw a line to the entity it corresponds to. Also, I added some buttons over here. So there are some situations in which perhaps you'd have a model and it'd be overlapping with the entity. So if I have this model selected, you can see now it's like disabled here and switch between components here. And then if I just want to highlight the actual entity, I can hit select entity, and now it moves that. Oh, also I added a animation system for the sprite. Move that up, edit it. We'll go into UI present, and now you can see it plays a nice little animation. That's just coming from my sprite sheet here, but loops through these here. And it's hard-coded, but it gives me a lot of flexibility. So you can see the UI present has all of these frames, and you can set the duration, the width and the height, and the X and Y per frame. Also, I moved this other tab down at the bottom here just for convenience. So the last thing I wanted to do before I end the devlog was just to go over how exactly I'm organizing the lore. And essentially I'm using this program called Obsidian. It's basically like a visual Wikipedia would be the best way to describe it. You can see everything, all these colored nodes essentially represent something in the game. And if you click on any of these things, they link to a page, right? So this page is Blackwood Isle, and it shows like anything that's related to it, right? So you can tell that the character Will has something to do with Blackwood Isle, right? He's the dockmaster here. You can tell that this quest, the Crimson Secret, has some business on Blackwood Isle, and then you can see that Blackwood Manor is on top of Blackwood Isle. Right? There's factions, like the followers of Dog are on Dog's Basilica, which is in deep water. So it's kind of cool. It's just a way to organize things visually. Really, really useful. It's called Obsidian. Recommend checking it out. Anyway, that'll do it for devlog number 1. I know this one's going to be a little boring just because a lot of it is very architecture focused. I'm going to try to put these out once a month. So this is the one for February. And the one for March should be up by the end of the month. Until next time, guys. Catch you later.